Karen from the HOA called the police to rein in my property, but she froze when she saw what I pulled out. She stood there radiating self-importance, certain I'd crumble under her absurd homeowners association rules. But when the officers arrived, I strolled calmly into my shed and brought out something that made both her and the cop go silent. It wasn't a weapon, and it wasn't a threat. It was a secret I had guarded for years, powerful enough to shut her down instantly. You'd never guess what I had prepared for people exactly like her. It all started the morning Karen Crawford appeared at my cabin, clipboard in hand and that smug little smile plastered on her face. The peace I had enjoyed in retirement vanished the moment I saw her. I had been in the yard, tending to the old wooden fence my grandfather built with his own hands decades ago, when I heard the distinct click of high heels on gravel. Karen stepped out of her spotless white Tesla like she was marching into battle. Her blonde hair was drawn so tightly into a bun it gave her a constant look of disapproval. She wore her signature HOA Power outfit, a tailored navy blazer, perfectly pressed slacks, and enough jewelry to pay off a small country's debts. The clipboard she carried looked less like something to write on and more like a weapon she planned to use against me. "Mr. O'Brien," she began, her sharp, nasal tone slicing through the morning air, "we need to discuss several violations of Pine Valley Estate's community standards." No polite greeting, no good morning, because in her world, small talk was time that could be better spent breaking her neighbor's spirits. I set down my tools, wiped my hands on an old rag, and studied her face. There was a predatory gleam in her eyes, like a hawk spotting a helpless mouse, and I was pretty sure I was the mouse. "I wasn't aware of any violations," I replied evenly, though my pulse was already picking up. "I've kept the property exactly the way my grandfather maintained it." Karen's laugh was short, sharp, and completely humorless. "Oh, Mr. O'Brien, a broken bar. Where to even start?" This rustic look might have been a quaint back in the day, but Pine Valley Estates has moved far beyond that. She flipped through the pages on her clipboard like a prosecutor presenting airtight evidence. "All fencing must be either white vinyl or wrought iron, freshly painted and properly maintained. Your wooden fence is in direct violation of multiple sections of our guidelines, and your cabin's exterior," she paused, letting the words sink in, "needs to be brought up to the architectural standards of our community. As it stands, it's frankly an embarrassment to our neighborhood's property values." Then I noticed something chilling. The documents in her hand weren't scribbled notes, they were neatly typed, formatted, and dated. The date was from a week earlier, long before she'd even been on my property. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment inspection. This was premeditated. She had been watching me, planning this confrontation, and waiting for her moment to strike. "I see you've put a lot of work into this," I said slowly, nodding toward her clipboard. Her smile widened into something shark-like. "I always come prepared. As HOA president, it's my job to maintain our high standards." She flipped to another page. This one had architectural sketches and cost estimates. "I've already gotten quotes from several contractors. The improvements will cost about $45,000, which I understand could be difficult for someone on a fixed income." Her tone dripped with condescension, but her next comment revealed the real game she was playing. She glanced toward my cabin's big picture window, eyes settling on the painting above my fireplace. "That's an interesting old piece you've got there. Landscape, isn't it? Looks vintage. I imagine something like that might be worth quite a bit." Her voice was casual, but I could feel the undercurrent. She wasn't asking out of curiosity, she was fishing. But why would she be interested in my grandfather's simple old landscape painting? It was beautiful, yes, but hardly museum-worthy. My grandfather always said this land had something special about it, I told her, watching closely. He spent years studying the geology, mapping the terrain, digging into its history. For a moment, I caught the flicker of alarm in her eyes before she masked it. "Interesting," she said, though her voice had lost a bit of its earlier bite. "And what exactly did he find so fascinating?" Before I could answer, she snapped back into her role. "Anyway, you have 24 hours to start bringing your property into compliance, or I'll have to involve law enforcement." She handed me a thick packet of official-looking documents, heavy with seals and signatures. Karen leaned in, her voice calm but laced with threat, listing her influential contacts, say from the sheriff's office to the mayor's desk, right down to the county planning commission. She made it clear they all understood her mission to protect property values and uphold community standards. The smile she wore didn't reach her eyes. "I'd hate for this to turn into a legal issue," she said, "but I'll do whatever's necessary to safeguard our neighborhood's integrity." Then, with the slow confidence of someone convinced they'd already won, she turned toward her Tesla. Her heels clicked against the gravel as she called over her shoulder, "Oh, and Mr. O'Brien, a broken bar, you might want to think very carefully about who you're up against. Some fights just aren't worth the cost, especially when you're so clearly outmatched." The sleek car purred to life, and within moments she was gliding down the tree-lined road, leaving behind the kind of storm that doesn't blow over quickly. I stayed in the driveway, legal packet heavy in my hands, feeling like I'd just been blindsided by a freight train. The sun still shone over the mountains. The birds still sang from the oaks my grandfather had planted, yet something essential had shifted. The peace and connection I'd always felt here had been cracked open by a woman with too much authority and a clipboard to match. But staring at the cabin that had sheltered 3 generations of O'Brien men, I felt something stir. Not fear, not surrender, determination. Karen might believe she held all the cards, but she had no idea what my grandfather had left me, and even less idea what I was willing to do to protect it. That night, I couldn't sleep. Her voice kept replaying in my mind, but more than her threats, it was the way her eyes lingered on my grandfather's painting that unsettled me. Her interest had a hunger to it, something well beyond idle curiosity. I paced the creaking wooden floors barefoot, following paths worn by generations before me. The old cabin seemed to whisper in the darkness, as if keeping its own counsel. My grandfather had never been a man to leave his family unprepared. He always thought 3 steps ahead. When dawn lit the tops of the pines, I made my choice. I would fight back, but first, I had to uncover exactly what I was up against, and what weapons, literal or otherwise, my grandfather had hidden here. I began in his bedroom, untouched since the day I inherited the property. The air still carried traces of his pipe tobacco and aftershave, bringing back memories of weekends and his stories from the service. But I wasn't here to reminisce. On the dresser sat a hand-carved wooden box, its Celtic knotwork so intricate it looked like it had taken weeks to make. I'd seen it before and assumed it held keepsakes, cufflinks, pocket watches, the harmless trinkets of a retired teacher. This time, I opened it. Inside, nestled in worn velvet, were objects that stopped my breath cold. These weren't mementos from a quiet life. They were artifacts of a man who'd led a far more dangerous and complex existence than he'd ever let on. The first thing I saw were old black and white photographs. In them, my grandfather stood in uniform on this very land, surrounded by other soldiers whose expressions carried the weight of something serious. They weren't posing for nostalgia. They looked like men guarding a secret. One photo had my grandfather's handwriting along the bottom. Strategic Reserve Location Alpha A Mission Classified. Beneath the photos lay a folded note. In his familiar hand, it read, "Marcus, if you're reading this, then Karen Crawford has finally made her move. I've kept my eye on her for years and I know what she's after. She's dangerous, more than you realize. Check the painting above the fireplace, then find the entrance to the bunker under the kitchen. Everything you need to protect our legacy is there. Do not let her win. This land must remain in O'Brien hands, whatever the cost. P.S. The uranium deposits beneath the lake are real. She knows about them." I read it twice, each line rearranging my understanding of my life in Pine Valley Estates. A bunker under the kitchen, uranium, and the chilling certainty that my grandfather had known exactly who Karen was and what she wanted long before she came knocking. My hands trembled as I read on, trying to absorb the weight of what my grandfather had written. This was no longer about petty HOA citations or arbitrary community standards. This was about something far bigger, and it suddenly made perfect sense why Karen was so intent on driving me off this land. The rest of the contents in the box painted a picture of a man I hadn't truly known. There were military records naming him as Captain Michael O'Brien, Intelligence Division, decorated for exceptional service and operations that remain classified to this day. There were geological maps of the property, hand-drawn with the precision of someone who knew exactly where to look and what to look for. And then I found the photographs, dozens of them, of Karen Crawford, shot from a distance with a telephoto lens. They showed her meeting with people I didn't recognize, in places that didn't feel like casual encounters. He had been watching her for months before he died, methodically compiling evidence for a case I was only beginning to understand. At the very bottom of the box lay a map of the cabin and surrounding land, marked with cryptic symbols and notations. Red X's dotted the shoreline with notes about extraction points and mineral readings. But the thing that made my pulse spike was a blue arrow pointing toward the kitchen floor, labeled simply, "Emergency Access Point." My grandfather hadn't left me just a rustic retreat in the mountains. He'd left me a stronghold A1 built with hidden resources and intelligence files on the very person who was now circling for the kill. Karen thought she was pushing around an aging retiree she could intimidate. She had no idea the bloodline she was up against. I closed the box, a spark of something long dormant flaring to life inside me at the same rush I felt during my most high-stakes missions at NASA. My grandfather had spent years preparing for this moment. Now it was my turn to finish what he started. The painting above the fireplace suddenly looked different, like it was daring me to take the next step. I could almost hear his voice telling me to get moving. The phone rang at precisely mid-morning, cutting through the silence. Karen's voice slid through the speaker coated in fake warmth, but underneath was cold steel. "Good morning, Mr. O'Brien. I trust you've had time to think over our conversation. I've gone ahead and contacted the Sheriff's Department regarding your non-compliance. Officer Williams will be arriving shortly to evaluate the situation." She paused just long enough for me to hear the satisfaction in her tone. "I do hope you've prepared yourself for the consequences of your stubbornness. Some people only learn when the lesson is made public." 20 minutes later, a patrol car rolled into my driveway, with Karen's white Tesla close behind. Through the kitchen window, I watched Officer Jake Williams step out, looking like he'd rather be dealing with literally anything else. His young face held that weary look of someone reluctantly dragged into a neighborhood feud. Karen, on the other hand, emerged with all the confidence of a general arriving at a surrender ceremony. She was dressed in a sleek black suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly paycheck, and her high heels tapped against the gravel like a countdown clock. In her hand had the inevitable clipboard and slung over her shoulder, a professional camera. "Officer Williams," she began as they approached my porch, her tone carrying the authority she so desperately clung to, "I'd like you to witness the blatant violations of our community standards. Mr. O'Brien has had more than enough time to address these issues, and his refusal is a direct threat to our neighborhood's property values." She swept her arm toward my wooden fence as if she were pointing out a toxic waste dump. Then she lowered her voice just enough to add, "I'm also concerned about his mental state. Yesterday, he made several threatening remarks and acted in a way that suggested instability." The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a fire you didn't see coming. In that moment, I realized her goal wasn't simply to evict me. She was trying to destroy my reputation first. Officer Williams shifted uncomfortably, clearly not enjoying the role he'd been cast in. Officer Williams glanced between Karen's dramatic display and my steady composure. "Ma'am," he said evenly, "I'll need to hear both sides before making any judgments. Mr. O'Brien, what's your take on these claims?" His voice carried the weight of someone who valued truth over quick conclusions. I knew this was my opening at a moment my grandfather had quietly prepared me for. I could almost feel him urging me forward. "Officer," I began, stepping toward the cabin's front door, "I appreciate you taking a fair approach, but before we talk about community codes, there are a few things you both need to see, things that will change how you view this situation entirely." Karen's eyes narrowed, a flicker of unease breaking through her polished expression. She'd expected excuses, stalling, maybe even an apology. Instead, I was staring the conversation and that was not part of her plan. I returned moments later with 3 items. The first, my grandfather's old landscape painting, harmless to the untrained eye but hiding something far older than any HOA charter. The second, the carved wooden box containing decades of preserved evidence. The third, a large-scale, 3D printed model of the entire property, complete with laser projection equipment capable of displaying boundaries with pinpoint accuracy. The model itself was a work of art, every ridge, slope, and structure rendered in remarkable detail, but the real power sat in the small red button at its base. This painting, I said, carefully removing it from its frame, "has been in my family's cabin for generations. But what matters isn't the picture, it's what's behind it." I flipped the frame to reveal a document, untouched for decades, the original federal land grant, signed and sealed, giving the O'Brien family legal ownership of 80 acres in perpetuity. Officer Williams leaned closer, his expression tightening as he took in the seals and signatures. "Mr. O'Brien," he said slowly, "this means your family doesn't just own this cabin, you own most of the land Pine Valley Estates sits on." Karen's face drained of color, but I wasn't finished. I opened the wooden box and spread a series of wartime photographs across the model's base. These were taken when my grandfather, Captain Michael O'Brien of the Intelligence Division, was stationed here during a classified mission. His orders were to secure strategic mineral deposits. This land was designated a permanent federal reserve. The images bore official stamps and signatures, a undeniable proof of the mission's authenticity. Then I pressed the red button on the model. Laser lines sprang into the air, forming a glowing 3D map of property lines that could not be disputed. Green outlines marked our family's legal boundaries, red highlighted areas that had been developed without permission. The display made it impossible to ignore. Over 2/3 of Pine Valley Estates had been built on O'Brien land with no compensation or legal right. This model, I explained, was built using geological surveys my grandfather collected over decades. It's backed by both historical records and modern GPS data. I pressed another button. The projection shifted to reveal underground formations, rich uranium deposits. "These," I said, "are what my grandfather discovered, and what certain people have been trying to exploit illegally for years." Karen's voice cracked as she tried to push back. "Those could be forgeries, fake photos, anyone could," but even she seemed to hear how hollow the words sounded. Officer Williams was already scribbling notes, his focus sharp. "Ma'am, these appear to be legitimate federal documents. If Mr. O'Brien's right about the boundaries, this is no longer about neighborhood rules." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the quiet hum of the projector and the wind in the pines outside. Karen, who had arrived certain of her control, now stood frozen, a predator realizing she had wandered straight into a trap. But I knew her type. This wasn't the end. Her eyes had that calculating glint, already working on a counterattack, and whatever came next, I was certain it would be even more dangerous than the opening round. I woke to the persistent buzz of my phone, a sound that instantly set my nerves on edge. 17 missed calls from unfamiliar numbers glared back at me, followed by a storm of text messages that ranged from concerned to outright hostile. But it was the email from Mrs. Miller, my elderly neighbor, that truly caught my attention. "Marcus, dear," she wrote, "you'd better check the local news. That awful woman has been busy." A sinking feeling settled in my stomach as I powered up my laptop. On the homepage of the Pine Valley Gazette was a photo of Karen smiling like a queen who'd just won a decisive battle. The headline beneath it made my blood run hot. "Local man threatens neighborhood with fake documents, a mental health concerns raised." The article was a surgical strike on my character. According to the piece, I was an unstable recluse, harassing respectable community leaders with forged military paperwork and spinning wild tales about non-existent uranium deposits. Karen had given the reporter an exclusive interview, feeding them lines designed to make me sound unhinged. "Mr. O'Brien has been behaving erratically ever since inheriting his grandfather's property," she was quoted as saying. "He's shown officials what appear to be fabricated records and has made alarming claims that simply aren't true. We're worried about his mental health and our community's safety." The reporter had clearly skipped any attempt at fact-checking, preferring drama over truth. To make matters worse, Karen had unleashed her social media network. Short, selectively edited videos were already circulating on Facebook and Nextdoor, clips showing Officer Williams inspecting my documents, with all context about their legitimacy conveniently removed. Her captions painted me as a dangerous man trying to intimidate police with fake evidence, and the comment sections were filling fast with neighbors declaring their concern over having a loose cannon living nearby. I had to admit it was an effective play. By getting her version out first, she'd put me on the defensive before I could even take the offensive. But she'd underestimated me. I still had the truth and the means to present it in a way no one could twist. I set up new social media accounts, compiling every piece of evidence in my possession. But simple posts and scanned documents wouldn't be enough to counter her slick propaganda. I needed something visual, undeniable, and a kind of presentation that would cut through the noise and grab attention. That's when I remembered the most impressive feature of my 3D model: the ability to live stream its laser-projected display to any online platform. At precisely 2 p.m., just as the afternoon news cycle began to swell, I went live. My phone's camera captured both me and the model as I laid out the evidence step by step, starting with the federal land grant hidden behind my grandfather's painting, and building toward the laser-projected proof of our property boundaries. "Good afternoon," I began, meeting the lens with calm certainty. "I'm Marcus O'Brien, and I'm here to show you the truth about what's happening in Pine Valley Estates. What you're about to see isn't rumor or theory, it's documented proof that a corrupt HOA president has been stealing land from families like mine for years." The viewer count ticked upward in real time, comments pouring in faster than I could read. I held up each piece of evidence for the audience, the photographs with military timestamps and signatures, the land grant with its official seals, and then activated the laser mapping. The glowing boundary lines left no room for argument. Even skeptics could see exactly where our property ended and where Pine Valley Estates had illegally encroached, as verified by historical records and modern GPS surveys. Then, the real turning point: Mrs. Miller stepped into frame. In her hands was a thick manila folder. "Marcus, dear," she said, addressing both me and the swelling online audience, "I think it's time people saw what I've been documenting these past 2 years." She opened it to reveal stacks of photographs, each one showing Karen and her husband conducting clandestine surveys of The photographs in Mrs. Miller's folder showed Karen and her husband creeping around different neighborhood lots in the dead of night, always equipped with heavy-duty mining gear. "I'm a retired court clerk," Mrs. Miller told the viewers, her voice steady, "and I know suspicious behavior when I see it. This woman's been laying the groundwork for something big, and she's been at it for years." The comment feed erupted. Then she pulled out a series of audio recordings, snippets of late-night conversations she'd overheard from her kitchen window. In them, Karen could be heard discussing how to remove obstacles and clear out certain properties to make way for resort expansion. The recordings might not hold up in a courtroom, but in the court of public opinion, they hit hard. Together with my documented proof, Mrs. Miller's testimony built a damning story that Karen would have a hard time dismantling. And then, almost on cue, my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered on speaker, still broadcasting live. Karen's voice crackled through the feed, taut with fury. "You think you are clever, don't you, Mr. O'Brien, posting your little videos, tossing around your wild accusations? You don't know who you are dealing with or what I can do. This isn't over, not even close." The line went dead, but the damage was already done. Thousands of people had just heard what sounded very much like a direct threat against a man simply defending his family's land. I kept the stream running for another hour. By the end, the video had been shared across countless platforms, and even traditional media outlets were picking it up. By nightfall, #SaveMarcusCabin was trending locally, and my phone was ringing off the hook with reporters looking to verify the story. Karen's carefully staged media blitz had blown up in her face, and now it was her reputation on trial. Still, the edge in her voice during that call told me one thing: this win wouldn't last. She was already plotting something far worse than a PR war. 3 days later, the FBI showed up at my cabin, but they weren't there to slap on handcuffs. Special Agent Sarah Martinez, a sharp-eyed, mid-40s, radiating the kind of authority that comes from having seen it all twice, introduced herself while studying the 3D model that had ignited the whole storm. "Mr. O'Brien," she said, activating the laser projection, "we've been tracking illegal uranium mining in this region for the last 18 months. Your live stream gave us some very interesting leads, especially on possible extraction points. We'd like to combine what you found with our investigation." Behind her, 2 tech specialists unloaded scanning gear that made my grandfather's painstaking hand-drawn maps look like ancient cave sketches. But the readings confirmed his predictions exactly: rich uranium veins running right where he'd marked them decades ago. What followed was like watching an empire crumble in slow motion. Every new lead exposed another layer of Karen's operation. Agent Martinez's team soon uncovered the truth. The luxury resort was a smokescreen. The real profits came from a state-of-the-art, totally illegal uranium mining setup hidden beneath the artificial lake. The investment was massive, millions of dollars worth of equipment, and the fingerprints of organized crime were all over it. This isn't some petty land scam, Martinez told me as we watched surveillance footage of Karen meeting with people who were definitely not in the hotel business. This is a major international operation. And your family's land? It sits on one of the richest uranium deposits in the western United States. The real turning point came when Ryan Crawford, Karen's 16-year-old son, appeared at my cabin carrying a worn backpack. Inside was evidence that could obliterate his mother's empire. The boy looked terrified. The kind of fear that comes from years of emotional manipulation. But his voice was steady enough when he spoke. She made me help bury containers of radioactive material, he admitted, spreading out a stack of photographs on my kitchen table. She told me if I ever told anyone, she'd send me to military school and I'd never see daylight again. But after I saw your live stream of Broken Bar, I knew she'd been lying, even about those glowing rocks. The pictures showed Ryan and several men lowering metal canisters into the ground near the lake. Bright hazard symbols screamed from their surfaces, along with federal tracking codes. His account revealed the true reason Karen had been so desperate to seize my property. The uranium vein didn't just run under the resort, it stretched well past it, right beneath my cabin and on toward the national forest. She's been working on this for 5 years, Ryan said, pulling out detailed maps his mother had forced him to draw. Every family she's driven out, every bogus violation she's handed out, it's all been to secure the mining sites. Your land's the key because it controls the water rights and the main road in. The kid had carried this secret for years, watching his mother crush families and smile for the cameras as if she were a model citizen. And now, Mrs. Miller's earlier audio recordings took on a whole new weight when the FBI technicians enhanced the recordings using specialized equipment, bringing Karen's voice into sharp clarity. Her words painted a damning picture of discussions about bribing county officials, intimidating local property owners, and coordinating with what she referred to as our partners overseas. One particularly incriminating exchange exposed her backup plan in case the HOA violations failed. She intended to have me declared mentally unfit, forcing the sale of my property to a shell company secretly controlled by her criminal partners. In another clip, Karen coldly remarked, "The old man was getting too close to the truth. Lucky he had that heart attack when he did a Broken Bar, or we might have had to arrange something more permanent." That last statement hit me like a punch to the gut. The implication that my grandfather's death may have been engineered shattered me. Agent Martinez caught my reaction, placing a steady hand on my shoulder. "Mr. O'Brien," she said evenly, "we'll be exhuming your grandfather's body as part of this investigation. Given Mrs. Crawford's methods, we can't rule out foul play." The thought that Karen might have murdered him didn't just make this personal, it turned it into a quest for justice. My grandfather had spent his final years trying to safeguard something valuable, only to be taken out by someone who saw human life as a minor obstacle to profit. As the evidence piled up, FBI forensic accountants traced financial trails linking Karen to a Romanian organized crime syndicate known for illegal resource extraction. The resort itself had been a money pit from day one because it was never meant to make money. It was simply a cover story to explain the constant excavation and heavy machinery. Her accounts revealed over $3 million in deposits within 2 years, all funneled through shell corporations and offshore accounts to mask their true origins. When word of the FBI probe spread through Pine Valley Estates, public opinion swung sharply in my favor. Neighbors who had believed Karen's lies about my instability were suddenly at my door with apologies and offers of help. The HOA board unanimously voted to remove her from office and erase every violation she'd issued over the last 3 years. Soon, news vans crowded my driveway, transforming my once quiet cabin into the epicenter of a national story about corruption lurking beneath the surface of suburban respectability. But Agent Martinez warned me that Karen wasn't the type to go down quietly. Her criminal ties meant she had access to far more dangerous tactics than legal intimidation. "We're putting you under protective surveillance," she told me firmly. Cornered criminals can be unpredictably and lethal. That prediction came true at 2:47 a.m. on a moonless Tuesday. If not for the old motion sensors my grandfather had installed decades ago, I might not be here to tell the tale. The soft chime of the alarm pulled me from sleep as 3 black SUVs crept down my driveway, headlights off. Their movements were precise, calculated to military-like. I rolled out of bed and triggered the cabin's hidden defense systems, a web of cameras and recording devices my grandfather had built into the framework, all designed to stream live to multiple platforms while alerting law enforcement. Within seconds, my phone lit up with notifications. The feed was already reaching Agent Martinez, her team, and thousands of viewers online. Men in black tactical gear emerged from the SUVs with practiced coordination, but what froze my blood was the sight of Karen Crawford stepping out of the lead vehicle. She wore a tactical vest and carried what looked like military-grade communications equipment. The mask was gone as she was no longer the concerned HOA president but the criminal commander, barking orders to her hired muscle. "Remember," she snapped, pointing toward my cabin, "the documents and that computer module, destroy them completely. And if the old man's grandson tries to interfere, broken bar, you know what to do." What Karen didn't know was that my grandfather's experience went far beyond geology. His military background had shaped the cabin into a fortress, and he had built it with exactly this kind of attack in mind. As her team neared the front door, I flipped the switch that bathed the property in blinding floodlights and activated the exterior speakers. My grandfather's recorded voice boomed into the night. "Attention, you are trespassing on federal property protected under the National Security Act. This area is under active surveillance by multiple law enforcement agencies." The psychological effect was instant and devastating. The effect was immediate and crushing. Karen's mercenaries, expecting to find a half-asleep victim, were instead blinded by a flood of light, their cover gone, while the recorded voice of a man long dead echoed through the forest. The live stream chat erupted, viewers praising the brilliant foresight behind my grandfather's defenses. Several veterans in the comments even recognized the setup as a professional-grade deterrent. But it was Karen's expression that stole the show. Her face twisted in fury as she realized that once again the O'Brien family had beaten her with preparation and strategy. That's when Ryan Crawford stepped from the tree line behind her team, holding her tactical radio and broadcasting her private chatter straight to the live audience. The kid had been quietly monitoring her frequency all night, waiting for the perfect opportunity to flip the script. "Mom's been talking to someone named Victor about wiping out witnesses," he told the camera. His voice steadied despite the danger. "She promised him that after tonight, there'd be nobody left to testify about the mining." The name Victor instantly sent a ripple of alarm through both the viewers and the FBI agents closing in. Agent Martinez's voice crackled over the emergency channel. "All units, we have confirmation of an international criminal conspiracy. This is now a federal terrorism case." The situation had just escalated from corruption to national security, and Karen's face drained of color. But cornered criminals are often the most dangerous, and Karen proved it in the next moment. She pulled out what looked like a military-grade explosive, holding it high so everyone both on site and watching live could see. "If I can't have this land, nobody can," she shouted, her voice unhinged. "This ends with me and I'm taking everyone with it." From the shadows, Mrs. Miller appeared, cradling her late husband's Vietnam-era sniper rifle as though it had never left her hands. "Bethany Crawford," she called out, her voice clear and unwavering, "drop that device now, or I'll put a bullet through your skull just like I did to Viet Cong officers 40 years ago." The revelation stunned the audience. My kindly elderly neighbor was a decorated Marine sniper with 37 confirmed kills. "And I've never missed a target that threatened my family," she added. Karen's bravado crumbled. The explosive fell to the dirt, and her hands went up as FBI agents surged in. "Ryan," she pleaded to her son, "you don't understand what you've done." But Ryan only shook his head, speaking into the live camera broadcasting to hundreds of thousands. "No, Mama, you destroyed our family when you chose money over everything else. Marcus and Mrs. Miller are more family to me than you ever were." As agents led Karen away in cuffs, she turned back toward me, her voice carrying an icy promise. "This isn't over, O'Brien. You don't know how deep this goes or how many people want you dead now." The footage captured everything, cementing a permanent record of the conspiracy and hinting at a much larger network beyond one corrupt HOA president. 6 months later, with Karen's criminal empire in ruins, Pine Valley Estates had finally become a true community instead of a kingdom ruled by fear. I sat on my repaired front porch, sipping coffee from a birthday mug Ryan had given me, watching the mountains glow gold and crimson in the sunrise just as my grandfather had loved them. The cabin was much as he'd left it, save for a small bronze plaque by the door, Captain Michael O'Brien Memorial Wildlife Preserve, a title granted by the Department of the Interior after his geological discoveries were made public. Karen's trial had been front-page news for weeks. Prosecutors revealed that the illegal uranium mining alone had brought in over $15 million, laundered through a web of shell companies across 3 countries, tied to Romanian organized crime groups dealing in both resource exploitation and human trafficking. When the federal judge handed down her 25-year sentence with no chance of parole, he called it one of the most sophisticated environmental crimes in modern U.S. history, noting her complete absence of remorse. The judge remarked that Karen's utter lack of remorse meant she'd remain a threat to society, even from a prison cell. But during the trial, it was the truth about my grandfather's death that cut the deepest. FBI forensic specialists had exhumed his body, uncovering traces of a rare Eastern European toxin, one that mimicked heart failure and left almost no trace for investigators. It turned out Karen had poisoned him just 3 days after he'd reached out to the FBI about strange activity near the lake. The timing left little doubt, as she'd been monitoring his communications and decided to silence him before he could testify about her operation. Knowing that my grandfather had died fighting to protect our family's land gave his final precautions even greater meaning. Each time I activated the defensive systems he'd engineered, it felt like speaking directly to his memory. Ryan Crawford became something of a folk hero in his own right. His bravery in exposing his mother's crimes earned accolades from law enforcement agencies and advocacy groups dedicated to shielding children from abusive households. The court granted him emancipated minor status and awarded him a large settlement from his mother's seized assets. He invested that money in his education at Montana State University, where he planned to study environmental law. Ryan moved into the cabin's renovated guest room, becoming the younger brother I never had, and worked alongside me to maintain the property as we transitioned it from a private retreat into a functioning research site. Mrs. Miller, whose full name turned out to be Dorothy Miller Chena, had been married twice, both times to military men who valued operational discipline. Once her military service became public knowledge, she became a local celebrity. The Marine Corps awarded her a commendation for her decisive role during the standoff with Karen, crediting her with preventing a potential terrorist incident. She settled into a small apartment above the cabin's workshop, spending her days cultivating a wildflower garden in my grandfather's honor and her evenings teaching Ryan and me the finer points of tactical awareness. As for the uranium deposits that sparked the whole ordeal, they were now managed by a joint task force of the Department of Energy, the EPA, and the University of Montana's Geology Department. Instead of rushing to strip mine the area, the government launched a long-term research project focused on sustainable extraction methods and environmental safeguards. I was hired as the site's chief geological consultant, an opportunity to honor my grandfather's work while ensuring it served science rather than greed. The irony wasn't lost on me that Karen's avarice had led to exactly the kind of responsible stewardship my grandfather would have endorsed. Pine Valley Estates itself underwent a total transformation. Residents voted unanimously to dissolve the HOA and adopt a Democratic neighborhood council. The oppressive rules Karen had weaponized were replaced with practical guidelines designed for genuine community welfare. Property values rose once the criminal element was gone, and several families who had been driven away by her harassment returned to reclaim their homes. The artificial lake once used to hide the mining operation was being restored into a natural wetland, complete with walking trails and educational signs about the area's geological and historical importance. But the most gratifying development was the creation of the Captain Michael O'Brien Community Foundation, funded through Karen's forfeited assets, dedicated to defending property rights and supporting families targeted by corrupt officials. The foundation was Ryan's idea, a way to ensure my grandfather's sacrifice would keep protecting people long after our fight was over. The concept drew support from veterans groups, environmental advocates, and civil liberties organizations nationwide. Its first major project was a legal defense fund for homeowners facing questionable HOA citations, offering free legal aid to those unable to fight back against institutional bullying. Meanwhile, the investigation into Victor and his Romanian criminal network continued, as international agencies worked to dismantle a sprawling syndicate involved not just in uranium theft, but also arms trafficking, human smuggling, and cybercrime. The FBI's agent Martinez had cautioned me that some of Victor's people might still see me as a loose end worth cutting, but between my grandfather's layered security systems and the Bureau's quiet, constant watch, any attempt would be a gamble no sane person would take. I'd made peace with the reality that some fights leave behind enemies who never forgive you or forget, but I'd also learned that facing down corruption was worth every risk it carried. That morning, as I set down my coffee and turned toward another day's work for science and community, I thought back to the moment this all began. Karen Crawford in my driveway, clipboard in hand, already planning my destruction. Since then, I'd found courage I didn't know I had, built friendships I'd carry for life, and discovered that sometimes the best way to honor the past is to fight for the future. My grandfather's legacy lived not just in the acres he protected, but in the people who stood together against greed and intimidation. That, I knew, was exactly what he would have wanted. Ever watch someone ruin lives simply because they could? That hot, gnawing rage when the corrupt think they're untouchable? Marcus knew it well. His grandfather proved that careful preparation can outmatch brute force, and that sometimes the quiet ones hold the deadliest surprises. Here at Anadromnest, we seek out stories like Thessie where justice isn't just served, but served with precision. If this one struck a chord and you're hungry for more tales of perfectly executed payback, hit like and subscribe. We've got more coming, and more justice, more twists, more endings that leave you smiling. Thanks for sticking through this ride. Sanity mostly intact. We'll see you in the next showdown.